Ladies and gentlemen, this is Scary Bad Reviews, and this is my intro.
It's free real estate.
Alright, so, was going to be doing the Wolfman to kind of start my universal run-through of the original monsters that dominated Hollywood in the early days, but my laptop decided differently. I thought I had finished the video, I posted it, everything was good, looked on it this morning. Apparently, none of my work had been saved. The video didn't post, and yeah, just a great thing to wake up to and see. So, I have clumped the Wolfman in with the movie that I watched today. So we are getting a universal doubleheader with, two of their original monsters. We have the Wolfman, and we also have Frankenstein. Starting off with the Wolfman. The Wolfman was one of the later. He was probably in the middle of the original Universal installments, with the Mummy and Dracula and Frankenstein, I believe, all coming before him. Yeah, those came before him. And this movie was. I don't know if it felt different or it felt out of place with the rest of the Universal ones. I think that this movie, you can tell that it was made later on than the other ones that were right before it. In it, we have a man who is bitten by a werewolf. We learn a lot of the lore that surrounds werewolves. We learn their weaknesses, what they are, how they become that, and stuff like that. We get a great appearance from Bela Lugosi. Lon Chaney Jr. does a great job as the main character, as Talbot. We get to see him struggle with realizing what he does when he's in this form. And really for 1941, looking at him when he's in the werewolf form, he looks good. As I've said in previous videos, when I did American Werewolf in London and Van Helsing, Hollywood has this really weird relationship with werewolves in that they're super cautious about including them because nowadays you need to use CG, but even back before CG became a big thing, you had to use a lot of practical effects because, you tried to make your werewolf look unique, and a lot of times people thought that they were these massive things. They were always hybrids. They were people becoming wolves. They were people and wolves at the same time. And, this movie is where that came from, but they didn't feel the need to go overboard. This is really simple. It's just the fact that the man becomes covered in hair and grows teeth and claws. It's not an overly sophisticated look, but it works, and the simplicity of it, I think, is what works. You understand what he's becoming, you understand what he is, you understand what he can do without making him bigger, without making him, resemble a wolf too much. I think that they did a very good job in just keeping it simple because that's what they had back then. They didn't have the same kind of resources that we have now. I think that, for the time being and with the limited resources they had, this look holds up. I think that it looks great, and I think that the look holds up very well. I was very surprised seeing it on a high definition television and being like, okay, this actually looks really good. But this movie is important because it does establish, like I said earlier, it does establish our lore of werewolves for Hollywood. A lot of the things that happened in this movie hadn't been heard of before, with this whole idea of a werewolf, silver being their weakness, the full moon being when they come out. And this movie was what brought it, it kind of brought it up, got it going. I gave this movie a 7 out of 10. I didn't want to take too much off of it, but I do stand true to the fact that it does feel, this movie at least, does feel kind of slightly out of place with the rest of the Universal movies, those original ones. And I think that's just, when you debut something new to Hollywood, when you bring to light an actual, monster. I mean, with Dracula, they had to give someone fangs and a costume. With Frankenstein, they had to give him a costume. This situation, they had to tell him to be a monster. I mean, there was nothing about it, and there's no character to the monster. And I don't know. Sometimes it's kind of hard to describe certain things that I see in movies, certain ways that I feel about movies, and for some reason, this one just kind of feels like it's out of touch with the rest of the universe, at least at this point. When he appears later on in all the crossover ones, like House of Frankenstein, House of Dracula, Abbott and Costello, he definitely feels like he fits in better with those. But by himself, I just don't know. The movie kind of feels out of place from the rest of them. But it's still good. They're still good. The movie is still watchable. It's still a lot of fun to watch, especially around Halloween. And like I said, that the makeup job that they do in adding the hair and the teeth and everything, I think it's very important to point towards the simplicity of those special effects and make people understand that you don't always have to go overboard, especially nowadays when we have the ability to do so. The second movie that I watched, and I watched it today, is the original Frankenstein. This movie is awesome because it introduces not only one of the most famous monsters, one of the most identifiable monsters that there is, but this movie brings to light a very, I don't want to say overused, but I mean one of the main kind of character arcs that is then used in almost every other piece. I mean, all kind of movies use it, all kind of literature uses it. This movie was what really brought to life that character arc of something being a monster, something not knowing how it's supposed to fit in, and eventually, thawing out the heart, really just kind of coming into being a human, understanding what it is and how it could work within society. So this was definitely, it's a very important movie because it brings in that plot point. And on top of this, I mean, it's just well done. I mean, nowadays we know the story so well of how Frankenstein's monster came to be. Again, this is very similar to Wolfman in that back then they didn't have the ability to go overboard on makeup and on, special effects, and so you get really simplistic looks that just define the monsters themselves. And this is definitely one of them. I mean, this thing, it just, the makeup just looks great, especially in black and white. Like I've seen, older versions where Frankenstein is in color, and I think that this one in black and white might have still been my favorite as the original one. Boris Karloff does a great job at portraying the monster and giving us a visual of what this creature is. Because if you read the actual book, if you read Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, we never get a really definite description of this thing. We just get this idea that it's just this atrocity against nature, and that it's the worst thing in the world, and that it's the all-time abomination of all things evil. And, being able to put together an iconic look that we now attach so heavily to a single character is very impressive. I mean, I understand that you don't have an impression built upon the character yet because it hasn't been portrayed visually. People haven't seen it before. But when you're able to create a look that sticks more heavily than more recent adaptations, that's how you know that you've done it correctly. But this movie, you can see why all these Universal movies just kept going is because all of them they're good and they're very streamlined, and it was a different time in Hollywood. I mean, each of these movies is usually no more than an hour and 20 minutes. A lot of them are just above an hour. So it is really fun around Halloween time to just sit kind of and, plow through a bunch of them because they just feel like TV episodes. I mean, there are television series that have episodes longer than these movies. And so I gave this movie an 8.5. I gave Frankenstein an 8.5 because of how well done it is, how the emotion that you feel through the story, you really do understand that this is a creature that is trying to come to terms with what it is, trying to join society, trying to feel love, and you definitely feel, you feel the emotion of all of it, and you feel the performance. And both of these movies, along with the entire Universal franchise, the original ones, I talked about this before in like my first podcast episode, and why this is the best horror movie franchise and why it's the most important. On above establishing what a horror movie is, above establishing the baseline for cinema in the future, look at the cultural significance of these movies. I mean, these movies were coming out at a time around World War II. I mean, while World War II was going on, while the Great Depression was going on. I mean, people in America needed an escape from reality. They needed something presented to them that they knew was not real. They needed something presented to them that was purely fiction, that was super exotic, super foreign, super just off the wall fantasy that they could immerse themselves in to forget about the woes of their normal day-to-day life. I mean, they needed something that they could put themselves into and forget what else is happening in the world. And these movies were that outlet. They were that source of fantasy. I mean, these movies were where these people went to escape normal life and to escape the horrors of every day. They escaped into the horrors of the silver screen. So I always hold these movies to a very high standard when I review them, and I always keep that in mind, and that these movies were very important in, trying to help people here get through very tough times, some of the hardest times in our country. So I always love being able to talk about Universal movies and how they, kick-started everything and got everything going, but also how important they were outside of even cinema history and just in, United States history. I think that cinema played a great part in its very early days in keeping the country going, and I think that now it still plays a great part in our country's history, but I think that looking at the way everything kind of fell back then, that it's awesome to be able to sit and watch these movies, at home and understand the importance of them and see why everybody wanted to go see them back then, because they were good. And I mean, they're good now. They hold up. So, I had a lot of fun watching both these movies. Like I said, I gave Wolfman a 7, a Frankenstein an 8.5. And I highly recommend them to everybody to watch around Halloween. I mean, they're perfect. Even for just background noise. Like, if you're having a Halloween party, throw these things on in the background. They'll keep going. Throw them on. It's great background noise. It's great little ambiance. People having drinks can sit and stop for a little while, see the monsters that they know. So these are great movies, and they're definitely iconic, and they're definitely Halloween. So, yeah. Alright, so tomorrow I am currently looking at, for me personally, revisiting The Mummy. I have written about the movie before. I've talked about it in a couple different ways, and this is probably the Universal movie that I have the most experience with. I've seen it a couple times. I've actually seen all of its sequels as well, so I'll be hyped to watch it again and talk about it tomorrow. And then coming up over the next couple days, kind of closing out October, I'll have The Invisible Man, I'll have Creature from the Black Lagoon, I'll have Dracula. I'm going to take a shot at 2 crossovers of all these classic monsters, and then I'm going to go a little goofier for actually Halloween night in one of the most notorious monster movies that you guys will not see coming. So, thank you guys for listening. Thank you for staying with me this whole month as we kind of close it out. And, stay tuned to keep this thing going. Thanks.